almost any other time, historically speaking, and even other places in the world today. This is life, and there will be days that go by that I don't even look at it. And this story reminded me of how much that is. And I have gone back now and I've read Thessalonians
Mhm.
with completely new eyes, imagining myself in that position and how much those words would mean to me. And that's the effect that it had.
Good.
So thank you for bringing that. Hey everybody, I'm Joe Mayers, and this is Think Forever Behind the Scenes. Today we have an author interview with Laura Findley Evans about her story, The Letter. I had a great time talking with her all about her writing process and how she came up with the idea for this unique story and how she highlighted the theme of scripture. So I think you're going to enjoy it too. If you haven't listened to that story yet, go listen to our previous episode because there will be some spoilers ahead. If you are caught up, please enjoy this interview with author Laura Findley Evans. You know what's funny? I grew up around here, like in the county. This is the one spot that was a dead zone in the
Black
map
hole.
of my mind. I think it's kind of because the streets all kind of curve together.
Yeah.
The only way that I knew where this was is that there was a baseball card store
Oh,
on the corner, like right down the street, that I used to love to go to when I was a kid. So anyway, yeah, that was my only connection to this place was baseball cards.
oh, I have a recommendation for you.
Yeah.
There is a documentary, a 3-part documentary on the
Okay.
2004 Red Sox.
Okay.
And it's that year, you losing.
Yeah.
And they
It's
finally
the Curse of the Bambino.
put it together that year. And
Yeah.
it's really well done. They have clips and everything of actual footage, but
Mhm.
then they also brought back a bunch of the guys that played on that 2004 team
Yeah.
and interviewed them. So I found it, I'm not as much of a baseball fan,
Yeah.
more football, but it was really good.
Okay.
You might check it out. I
Well,
don't
you know how
remember
much
what
I
it's
love
called.
documentaries.
Yeah. I don't know what it's called, but you don't like documentaries?
No, I do.
Oh, yeah.
That wasn't sarcasm. I know it sounded like sarcasm.
It
It wasn't.
sounded a little bit like
No,
thanks.
I love documentaries. That's when everybody goes to bed and I'm done with work and I'm done with writing and my eyes don't want to read anymore. That's what I do. I
Well,
just
there's so many
plop on a documentary.
terrible shows out there.
It's interesting that you bring that up, but from there being a lot of horrible shows, because I think there are. I think just the streaming era has inundated us with mass content, and it's 100% quantity over quality.
Oh, yeah.
And unfortunately, it seems to be very analytical in the studio's minds, where if they don't get immediate return on it, they're going to cancel that and try something new because there's no shortage of content and it's so easy to produce.
Well, and they're just cranking them out.
Yeah.
And the writers, you can tell that the writers are just cranking them out because a lot of times the writing is just,
I think sometimes that happens when a writer will deliver a script and then it gets morphed and twisted and things like that.
why don't we try it this way?
But I think the side effect of that, at least for me, is that there are a few shows that are really well done and those now stand out.
Like Paradise.
Oh my gosh.
Have you watched that yet?
Yes. Yes. The season finale just happened.
Yeah, I watched it too.
Okay. That's still kind of current, so I'm not gonna talk too much about it because whoa.
I
One of the
know.
best things that I heard about that show that one of my friends was talking about it and they said, you have to watch Paradise. And I said, okay, what's the premise without ruining the show? And he's like, no.
No, you can't. Not.
No. It's great. It'll surprise you.
Yeah.
Just watch the show.
There's every single episode has a like, whoa.
Yeah. And honestly, I love Sterling K. Brown.
Mhm.
And so just him being in it was enough for me to be like, yeah, okay, I'll give this a shot.
Yeah.
But oh man, If you haven't seen Paradise yet, don't read about it. Just go and watch the first episode. That's it. Just watch one episode, then decide for
Never
yourself.
mind what it's about. We
Yeah.
don't
Don't matter.
worry about that.
Don't matter.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to move on. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep talking about that.
I didn't even know we were actually talking to people.
Okay, so I want to talk about your story and something that continues to surprise me about you and your writing is that it's very unique, not unique among writing, but unique to you.
Mm.
Because now you've done a couple of stories for the show, and we've collaborated on a lot of work, which is really fun. But you brought something this time that was different than anything else that I've read from you before. So what was that like to what inspired you to do something different, and how did you arrive at it?
For this episode, I kept seeing this scene in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
It was just an instant in time where this letter, parchment's lying on a table, and a girl, probably 12, I don't know, 13, we don't say how old she is looking at it and seeing it, and it's bathed in this kind of orangey yellow lamp light, this
Mm-hmm.
whole scene, and that's it. I knew it was a letter from Paul.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just some random parchment. I knew that was it, but what was the deal? Where was it? Why was it there?
Mm-hmm.
And as we've talked before, I'm a pantster right by the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
I don't plot stories out.
Yeah.
And I just started writing, and that's how I got into it. And I decided to do present tense
Mm-hmm.
to get that immediacy.
Mm-hmm.
If it had been past tense, we could have thought, oh, she lived a long time ago. But I wanted it to be, from her perspective, immediate present tense.
Yeah.
And that helped, once I started writing it. And then I could see her mother, getting ready for this event,
Mm-hmm.
kind of channel a little of myself, wanting everything to be just so.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's it. I know it was different, but in a way it's similar to some things I used to write a really long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, it was fantastic. The story was fantastic. And there are two things that I loved about it. One is that present tense, first person, it's ongoing. And what it did is in the show, we really try to capture the history and the culture, because that's so important to understanding these stories, is understanding the people who were actually living them. Because a lot of times we read in the Bible or church history, and we try to take that story and put it into our modern life. And that's not where it fits. You can't understand it there because there aren't the same issues going on. There's not the same landscape. Nothing is really the same, except for that we're all humans. And it really got us into that in a very specific way. The things that she was touching, the reasons why she went to the market, the way that the doors and the curtains and the lamps worked, the way that they washed up and things like that. It didn't require any explanation. It just drew us into that.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things that I loved. And the other thing that I loved was that you made the centerpiece of this not one character, but the letter.
Mm.
How did that come about? I mean, you talked about the scene, so I guess you saw it.
Mhm.
But how do you decide I'm going to make the main character of my entire story a letter?
I have, as many of us have, read the Bible pretty much my whole life.
Yeah.
And at different times in my life struggled a little bit with Paul's letters.
A little bit?
He's difficult. He's challenging. And we don't always understand what he means. Sometimes it's like, could we have a period somewhere? His sentences are so long. And it's like, wait, let me start this one over again. And so and then trying to make it fit us in our current life because it is important. The Bible speaks to us where we are.
Yeah.
But I also was thinking, wow, this had a beginning. This letter was real. It existed. Paul even signs his little scritchy, I visualize it as being scritchy at the very end. You'll know this is from me because I'm writing it in my own hand. This is
Yeah.
how I write,
Yeah.
he says. People got to see the actual parchment, got to hear the words. They were written to them personally from Paul, who'd been there. That's why, yes, it's called the letter. It's about our main character seeing it and experiencing it, but I wanted it to be, she's like our representative. I don't know, it was kind of an aha for me that this isn't just I open up my Bible and try to understand it. It's this had a beginning.
The thing that keeps on coming back to me about this story is how valuable that was to those people in that time and why. Because he mentions their persecution, at various times throughout Paul's ministry that was different in different locations, really depending on who was in charge of Rome at the time, without getting into too much of that history. But receiving something from him was just life-giving. And it makes me think that, okay, I've got all of it here anytime I want in a nice leather cover, and the pages are good and there's plenty of margin for me to write notes, and it's beautifully done. And that's not even the only one in the house. And nobody's looking over my shoulder when I read it. And at almost any other time, historically speaking, and even other places in the world today, this is life. And there will be days that go by that I don't even look at it. And this story reminded me of how much that is. And I have gone back now and I've read that. That was one of the first things I did after I read your story was I went and read Thessalonians
Mhm.
with completely new eyes, imagining myself in that position and how much those words would mean to me. And that's the effect that it had.
Good.
So thank you for bringing that.
I really wanted, especially at the end of that story, to show, Anna and her parents looking at this letter as Ozias carefully folds it back up and wraps it in the cloth. Like you said,
Yeah.
its value is beyond price, and
Well,
they knew that.
and the value that they placed on scripture in this story was such that it required an elder to handle it and read it. And it was an honor just to have the scriptures in your home, and it warranted going all out for a meal. And it was very selective who could even be invited because there's only so much room and we don't want to draw too much attention.
Right.
I have never seen that amount of value placed on the scripture in person.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to change that, but at least for my family, I want to.
We as Christians don't always think about, the risk that was taken to write scripture, to pass it around. I think about that was the thing when I was listening to Nick's story and
Yeah.
Nick's interview. It was like, oh my gosh, he and I were on the same path for our stories because
Yeah.
his was about the scrolls that were going to be destroyed and how do we get them to safety.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, that was exactly what this is about, except this one was the letter.
Yeah.
And again, it was a risk. It was valuable. It was precious.
Well, it's crazy how many different types of stories, because his story was 1,000 years later on a different continent, but it was still exploring the same thing
Right.
and the value that has been placed on scripture. Now we're, nearly 1,000 years on from that. Thank you for pouring into that. This will speak to how much I appreciate and admire your writing and how much I trust you as a person. I asked you about the story and you said yes and said, "Can I think about it for a little bit?" And I said yes. And you said, "Okay, I have a story and I'm working on it." And I said, "Okay, what's it about?" And you're like, "I'm not telling you." And I didn't even think about it. I said, "Okay."
Well, and the thing is for the audience to understand, it wasn't that I was like being all secretive and trying to
Yeah.
hold it away from you, but when I write, if I think too much about what's going to happen next, or I start telling somebody about it, it kind of it ruins my process. I just felt like I just needed to
Yeah.
get it wrapped up
You need to
first.
let it incubate a little bit
A
and
long time.
yeah, and figure out. But here's the thing. I don't know that I would have had that response with anybody else. Um, I've been there myself where people be like, "Hey, what are you working on? What do you want to do?" And I'm not quite ready to share yet. But my writing process is very, very different from yours. Um, I feel like it's been informed by your process in that I still feel like there's some sort of magic that happens between an author and their characters
Yes.
that I can't plot every action and every word that a character does because it doesn't leave room for them to surprise me
Right.
and it removes some of the magic and the fun
Yes.
because writing is lonely.
Yes.
And if you don't have your characters to play with, you're just, I mean, you're essentially a wood carver. You're just
Right.
creating tableaus. But I sort of bullet point where I
Mhm.
say, okay, here's where they start, and here are all the touch points they need to reach before they end. And so I know, within the next couple of paragraphs, it's going to be over here. But then I kind of let them play a little bit. Um, but I trust your process
Mm.
for you. And as soon as you
So it
said,
didn't worry you too much.
no, no, it didn't worry me at all. You said, yeah, it's not there yet. I knew that when it was ready, I was going to get it. The only thing that it did for me was made me want to read it more.
Mhm.
You're being all, I can't tell you.
Well, I would like to share with your audience
Yeah.
how much I value your input on my writing. Because, like you were just saying, it is a lonely process.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who thinks they can type or write the end and it's done, there's a lot of editing that needs to go on by the author,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but it also is very helpful to have someone else read it and give you feedback. And it's tricky because the kind of feedback that works well for each person might be different.
Yeah.
And for the way that you provide feedback from me is very helpful. Like, for example, getting a little bit more humor in
Mm-hmm.
with the dad,
Yeah.
show how do you show that without writing a paragraph about how funny he was, just and when you suggested that, I thought, okay, how do I do that? I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't easy to go back and just plop it in because the story was already pretty much done.
Yeah.
But it was very helpful. So,
All that I was thinking there was, wouldn't it be nice to see the dad and the daughter just have a little bit of fun?
yeah.
It was more of a question, like what would it be like to see that? And then you did something with it that I didn't even expect, and it turned out really nice.
It was
And
it was helpful for you to
her dad
say that.
seems like such a nice, sweet man.
Hmm.
So I'm part of a writing group now. A friend of mine had sort of put something together, and it's people who are kind of all over the country, but in the same phase of life, and really want accountability in
Mm.
terms of writing, um, to continue doing the things that we're passionate about. But a discussion came up this week where one of the members said, I'm sort of a pantster, which I was very proud that I knew that term, but that it was holding him back, and he was trying to look for tools and resources to outline a little bit better without making him feel like he was completely departing from his method. And a couple other people were chiming in. I let him know the way that I do it. And then finally, another guy came in and said, we've gotten to the point where there's so many writer tools out there. There's not one way to do it. You can go on and watch a dozen different YouTube videos with coaches saying, if you don't write like this, you're going to fail.
Right.
If you want to
right.
get published, you have to do this.
Right.
And it's not the case.
Mm-mm.
And working with people like you and Nick and Kelsey, who was on last week, everyone has a completely different process, completely different style. And the way that I like to help everybody who's being a part of the show is really just to ask questions. Is I don't want to change your style or your process. I want to get the most out of what that thing is, because that unique flavor is what makes it cool.
I was just thinking when you were talking about your writing group and everything, there is more advice out there, and people are writing books about advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Writing
And
books
then-
about how to write books.
And you can spend a lot of time reading and studying and all of that, and getting little hints here and there, like we've talked about Stephen King's book on writing, which is less prescriptive and just more sharing, and you got to understand his process, which is interesting. But do we want everything that's written to look and sound the same?
No.
Do we want it all to be written to, as they call it, writing to market, following the rules, and then pretty soon I worry that all the stuff that's written is going to sound the same.
Yeah. I was just going to say, one of my favorite books is a book about writing books. that's
Speaking of good
Stephen
books.
King. Yeah, but I think my favorite thing about that was that he references Strunk and White.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have that on my bookcase too.
He references this and says, that's probably all the rules that you need, and gives a lot of advice in there, but then also says, use what you like and don't use what you don't like. That's one of the things that I try to say anytime I've sent my thoughts on a piece that someone has sent me, whether it's for the show or for something else, is if I find a typo, fix that. If a word sounds weird to me, or if it pulls me out of the story, I'll tell you that. But anytime there's just a thought or a consideration, I'm not going to be offended if you don't change it, because it might be something that you have in there intentionally that's part of your recipe.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are just thoughts, and by including the right stuff and excluding the rest, you can kind of get there on your own. But you're right. If everybody did exactly the same thing, the world would be boring.
Well, and sometimes what works for me, as you know, I'm writing my third book in my series, is I have note cards, and I just jot down little things that are hanging out in my head. And a lot of times they're questions, speaking of questions.
When you're moving from one story to the next, especially if it's, longer novel type thing, how far do you take that pantsterness? Because with your books, which also are on the shelf, you're following several different characters, and it's pretty structured in terms of timeline and things like that. So how far do you take that? I mean, do you do that with your character development also?
Okay, for example, in the first book, I knew that there was going to be this one character who is an old man. and I needed him for a specific reason, which I won't give away. But I knew he was going to be in it. But then when I started writing him, he turned into one of the main characters.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, for my characters, a lot of times they take me a different way than I thought.
It's like when someone says, be patient, you say, how long? And they
Yeah,
say,
how long do I
be
have to-
patient? That's not patience.
Yeah.
Well, however you arrived there, they're fantastic. I know that they're middle grade
Mhm.
is the middle grade fantasy is the genre, but I enjoyed the stories. I listen to them. Well, I read them to my son.
Yeah.
Sometimes out loud and sometimes via the audiobook, because I got to do the audiobooks for you. But just since it's here, I guess this is just a day of pulling books off the shelf.
Yeah, I guess. Bookshelf day.
So this is for everybody. This is The Dragon and the Girl, book 1, True North. Yeah, it's middle grade, so it's good for what ages do you think are prime to start reading this?
Middle grade is usually defined as like 8 to 12, 8 to 14, that kind of range. Some people call them tweens.
Okay.
The reason it's its own little genre is less to do with the reading level as the content.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it doesn't
as
have some of the more risque things
yeah,
that
the
sometimes enter.
YA is you'll see the section in the bookstores which is considered young adult,
Mhm.
and those often have content that you wouldn't necessarily want your 8-year-old reading.
Yeah.
And there are 8 and 9-year-olds that can read anything.
Mhm.
Their reading ability is there, but thinking about content, and that was the thing, with these books, I wanted any parent being comfortable handing that to their kid and not worrying
Mhm.
about, gosh, I better pre-read this and make sure there's no whatever in there that I don't think is appropriate. And so that's really the range. But like you said, a lot of adults have said they liked it too. I am a former educator,
Mhm.
so I really wanted to put in some high level vocabulary, and I didn't want to dumb down the language. So it's there.
Yeah, well, it's not dumbed down at all, which I can attest to, having done the audiobooks and having to do a couple of edits for mispronouncing some words. But yeah, The Dragon and the Girl. This is book 1, True North. Great middle grade fantasy, good for the whole family, actually. And if you enjoy audiobooks, you can also get those on Audible if you want to listen to my voice read those stories to you.
I just want you to know that I have friends who are audiobook people, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
how they read. They listen to audiobooks. And I had one guy tell me, and we're talking about an adult here, he said, I go through probably 2 or 3 audiobooks a week because he listens while he works. And he
Whoa.
said that you are one of the best narrators he's ever heard.
Wow.
He loved what you did. And I'm thinking, there's somebody who knows. He's experienced, a lot of
He's heard enough
readers.
narrators. Wow, that.
Yeah. So
Oh, man.
everybody, hey, everybody, as Tolkien would say,
Hey, everybody.
pay attention, because it's great to listen in the car. A lot of people say, I don't have time to read this, a book like that. But just
Yeah.
put it in on the car. And if you've got kids in there, that's fine. It's not going to be inappropriate for them. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where I listen to audiobooks is in the car. I do it at the gym, and some people think I'm sort of a psychopath for doing that. But it gets me calm. I just like having somebody tell me stories. So,
Yep.
Okay. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being here and talking about your stories and your process. Do you have any final thoughts about the story before we go?
I wanted the letter, like you said, to be the main character, which is different from anything I've ever done. But I hope that what we got across in this was like you were saying earlier, the value of it, the preciousness of it, and that it will encourage all of us to read more of these valuable stories, books, letters,
Yeah.
and understand and the preciousness of them, and how privileged we are to have these in our homes, in our hands at any given time.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think it accomplished that. At least for me, it did. And I hope for everybody else, it will also. So, mission accomplished.
good.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. I'm looking forward to seeing how you surprise us next.
Gosh. No pressure.